Good morning. So, do you all remember from last week what the Buddhist monk said to the hot dog vendor? What did he say? Great. Who said that? Make me one with everything. And that about sums up last week's truth lesson on Buddhism. Yes, make me one with everything expresses a primordial idea of Buddhism and of unity. It means that we are all part of each other and part of the all, not independent entities like we've been programmed to believe. For example, we might think that these beautiful flowers here are separate entities from everything else, but we would be wrong. Ultimately, these flowers are made up of the whole cosmos. They are part sunshine, right? They are part seed from the soil. They are part rain from the clouds, and much, much else. They're not separate entities. And after most flowers' blooms are complete, they will decompose into the ground and they'll become fertilizer for the neighboring trees. And all this transformation is going on constantly within everything and within us, and faster than cell phone connections. Our cells are flying off and new cells flying on very fast. Even in the physical sense, we are part of the cosmos. When we identify with our bodies and our individual egos and think we're separate from all and each other, it is about as logical as thinking that these flowers were born as separate entities, as unrelated objects from the sun and the clouds and the soil that made them. It would be like a wave in the ocean thinking it's a separate entity and not part of the ocean. So make me one with everything really means to know that the truth of our oneness with everything. We can't refute the fact that we are, but we would like to know that. In other words, the so-called birthday of these flowers is really its re-manifestation. The flowers have already been here in many, many other forms. Its constituents have always been here and have ours. This concept of the interdependence of all things, like flowers being interdependent with the clouds and the soil and the sunshine and the air, etc., is known in Buddhism as emptiness, meaning that everything is a part of everything else and thus has no independent existence. Many people understand that concept of emptiness in Buddhism and think that it's something negative or nihilistic. It just means that everything, including us, is interdependent, and thus nothing exists as separate from anything else. And what did the hot dog vendor answer when the Buddhist monk asked for his change for the hot dog? I know one person knows, the person that told me. Sir, all change comes from within. This illustrates the Buddhist and unity idea, of course, that we create our world with our thinking, and that it's thus from within that we can change our world. We are constantly, of course, projecting our neuroses and our programming out there onto the world, creating our reality. By learning to be very present and aware of what we are doing, we can change our reality. In the Course of Miracles, it constantly reiterates that our prayer should not be for God to give us something physical or material, but rather for him to help us see the world differently. Thus, we won't need to change the whole world out there to be happy. We can change the way we perceive it. Both unity and Buddhism agree that we create our world through our thinking, our concepts, our prejudices, our thought patterns, and that we can thus change our world. Thus, real change comes from within. And that's why unity and Buddhism both concentrate so very much on exactly how to do this. That's why most people and most scholars of Buddhism say that Buddhism is what we in the West call psychology, which is the case for many of the teachings of Unity co-founders Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, too. Psychology. I'd like to share today some ideas from Thich Nhat Hanh's seminal book, Living Buddha, Living Christ, which is now on our website, right? Thich Nhat Hanh is an ordained Buddhist monk from Vietnam whose center, Palm Village, is in southern France. This internationally well-known monk came to the U.S. in 1960 to study comparative religion at Princeton University. He was subsequently appointed lecturer in Buddhism at Columbia University and has been very involved in the international peace movement. He's worked with many French and American diplomats to bring about world peace. Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., nominated him for the 1967 Nobel Peace Prize, saying, and I quote, "I do not personally know of anyone more worthy of this prize than this gentle monk from Vietnam. His ideas for peace, if applied, would build a monument to ecumenism, to world brotherhood, and to humanity." Thich Nhat Hanh, like the Dalai Lama, has devoted his life to bringing peace, brotherly love, and compassion to the world. Thich Nhat Hanh said that one of the reasons that we humans have historically engaged in strife and even war is due to religion. Thus, he showed in his book how truth, capital T, is the same for all of them. No religion has a monopoly on truth, he says. The point of all of them is to live the truth, the same truth. In the Bible, Romans 8:14, it says the same thing. All those who are led by the Spirit are sons and daughters of God. That means not just the members of any one religious group. Truth has existed since time immemorial. Thich Nhat Hanh said, there is no way to peace. Peace is the way. Peace right here in the present moment, with each look, each smile, each word, and each action. Peace and love are not the providence of any one religion. Thus, the title of his book, Living Buddha, Living Christ, means that the real purpose of Buddhism and Christianity is not to understand them or even to believe them, and certainly not to hate or fight over them, but to bring Buddha consciousness or Christ consciousness alive in our daily lives by living the eternal truths that they both taught. Why should we do that? Well, Christ said it's to have life and have it more abundantly. Buddha said that it's to end suffering and achieve enlightenment or a state of bliss. Very practical reasons. Thich Nhat Hanh said that practicing Buddhist precepts or Judeo-Christian commandments is not a matter of suppression or limiting our freedom, but rather a wonderful way to live with joy, since the eternal truths propose that the best way to enjoy mental, physical, and spiritual health is to live by these eternal laws. While reading Living Buddha, Living Christ, I started realizing that the Buddhist precepts and the 12 powers of Unity co-founders Charles Fillmore sounded a whole lot alike, both being very practical tools to help us achieve our spiritual goal of manifesting Christ in our lives. Fillmore's 12 powers are spiritual abilities that were expressed by Jesus and that Fillmore says are present in every person. Fillmore wanted us to discover how to develop and use these powers so that we could have life and have it more abundantly. The Buddhists talk about the same thing, developing such things as right understanding, wisdom, practice, right aim, etc., as seen in the Eightfold Path. Buddha felt that this path would enable us to end suffering, our suffering, by helping us live on a higher, more peaceful, joyful, and healthy level. The first of Fillmore's 12 powers is faith. One doesn't always have to have this faith from the start, but by committing to stay on the path, faith develops as one sees results. If you commit to your architect and he builds you a house, you have verification that he can do what you hoped he could do. That verification then becomes faith, the faith that your architect can build a house, because it's right there in front of you. He's done it. When we live by the eternal laws or truths, our lives work. Thus, faith in these truths becomes more and more evident and easier and easier. Anyone who becomes a Buddhist takes refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. That's the first thing you do when you commit to being a Buddhist. The Buddha is the one who shows the way. The Dharma, or the Buddhist teachings, offer understanding and love. And the Sangha is the community of other people on your spiritual path. And by so doing, by taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, one's life starts transforming. And then it's easier and easier to have faith in the spiritual path because it works. Likewise, as we live with Christ as our role model and the Christian teachings as our guide, and we choose the company of others who help us on our spiritual path, the Sangha, our lives start transforming. Things work. We're more peaceful and joyful and productive. Thus, we gain more and more faith in the eternal wisdom. Or, as the Buddhists would say, faith in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Christians make the sign of the cross, thus taking refuge in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Buddhists bow when taking refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha. The intent, though, is the same. One commits to the spiritual path. Another of Fillmore's powers is strength, the ability to endure, to stay the course, to accomplish the goal. That is at the heart of Buddhism, going toward enlightenment, which is that point at which the flower realizes that it is not a separate entity, but an amalgamation of the sun and the air and the earth and the rain or the clouds. It's when the wave acknowledges that it is part of all the other waves and the whole ocean. At that point, our fear, jealousy, negativity, and judgments toward others starts to diminish. Fillmore and the Buddhists urge us to develop the strength to go the whole 9 yards toward our spiritual goals. Prayer, meditation, caring for our physical temples are ways to develop this strength. Another of the 12 powers is wisdom, the ability to discern, to evaluate, and to apply what we do know. This is the whole point of Buddhist meditation and study. Look this week into the eyes of the Buddhist monks who will be here, June 1st and June 7th here at Unity, and I think you will see wisdom. Wisdom comes from knowing oneself, because when we do, we can start more easily developing compassion toward others. Thich Nhat Hanh says that meditation is when we act like a mother hen watching over our eggs, our consciousness, our mental states. One day, spiritual consciousness will just be born like baby chicks. Power is another of Fillmore's 12 powers, the ability to master and create our world. As we've said before, Unity and Buddhists agree that the best way to change our world is just to change our thinking. That is true power. And that is what the whole Buddhist system is, a psychology that helps us to develop that power. Fillmore and the Buddhists both tell us that we are all capable of the power that we need to create a new world, a completely different world, better world for ourselves. We have that power. In the Bible, John 3:16, it says, "As many as received him, to them he gave power to become the sons of God." Imagination and will are powers that often go together. Fillmore is talking about the ability to imagine, picture, and conceptualize and envision what you want, and then having the determination or the will to manifest it in your life. The Buddhist whole thrust is to imagine what enlightenment will look like in our daily lives, and then to be willing to stay on the path until it's accomplished. To Fillmore, will is the ability to choose, to decide, to command, to lead, and determine our own good based on spiritual laws. And Buddhism and Unity both assure us that this is entirely possible for all of us. Understanding is one of Fillmore's powers and part of the Buddhist Eightfold Path, right? Understanding. It involves the ability to know, to perceive, to comprehend, to understand truth, and let truth direct our lives. The same exact words apply to Buddhism and to the 12 powers. Buddha said that whether we can see and understand Buddha or not depends on us, on our state of being. Most of us have been hypnotized into believing that the relative plane is all there is. Through right understanding, we will start seeing through illusion, or what the Buddhists call Maya. This reminds me of the story of the young couple who moved into a new neighborhood. The next morning while they're eating breakfast, the young woman sees her neighbor hanging out the wash next door. "Her laundry's not very clean," she says to her husband. "She doesn't know how to wash correctly, obviously. Perhaps she needs to buy a better laundry soap." Her husband looked on, but remained silent. Every time her neighbor would hang out the wash to dry, the young woman would make the same comments about the dirty wash. About a month later, one morning, the woman was surprised to see a nice clean wash hanging on the line, and she said to her husband, "Look, she's learned how to wash correctly. I wonder who taught her this." The husband said, "I got up early this morning and cleaned our windows." And so it is with life. And we see, what we see often entirely depends on the clarity of the windows through which we are looking. Buddhism and Unity both teach that reality is quite different from our concepts. Two other powers which kind of go together are order and life. The ability to organize, to balance, and animate our spiritual goals in our daily existence. Christians know that first we must love the Lord thy God with all our hearts and all our might. The Buddhists say that Buddha consciousness is to be our only concern. Jesus was a force for good and order in a world full of turmoil. Buddha's time was historically less challenging, but people's personal lives were just as much in turmoil as are ours. And he helped create order and a new life for his followers, just as Jesus did. Buddhism and unity are both very practical in that regard. They help us live happier, more joyful lives by helping us keep in the forefront the most important values, truth, with a capital T. Another power, zeal, is the ability to be enthusiastic and passionate, and it is certainly inherent in both Buddhism and Christianity. I love the Chinese proverb that Buddha could have well said, "The person who says it cannot be done should not interrupt the person who is doing it." People who have zeal just get it done. They know things are possible. They manifest the spiritual precepts. I recently received an email that said, "Suffering is life without enthusiasm." The Buddhist approach is to look at the obstacles or fears that squelch our enthusiasm and know that we didn't put them there and we don't need to believe them. Another power is elimination, the ability to release, remove, let go of, deny, renounce all that no longer serves our good. Jesus said, "If thy right hand offendeth thee, cut it off." Buddha said that we must commit to living the truth and eliminate all that is not right action, speech, aim, and livelihood, etc., for our own good. And sometimes that means letting go of some of the people in our lives that do not reinforce the spiritual part of our lives. I did that one time and had no friends for 2 years. But it is so worth it, because when you do let go of all that is in your way and blocking your road on the spiritual path, you can get where you're going. And the last power is love. The Buddhists use the term compassion more, but they are of the same essence. We'll be hearing a lot more about compassion in the next week when the monks arrive. I found it particularly interesting that Thich Nhat Hanh talked in his book about how Gnostic Christianity and the teachings of the Eastern Orthodox Church are much more like Buddhism than Western Christianity. For example, the Greek Orthodox idea of deification, that a person is a microcosm of God, is close to the Asian tradition that states that the body of a human being is a mini cosmos. The Eastern Orthodox idea is that God made humans so that humans can become God. Thus, we are many gods, a micro-theos, who participate in the divinity of God. Quite different from the Western Church's insistence that humanity is sinful, base, and unworthy by nature. Thich Nhat Hanh says that this non-dual idea of God is very much like the non-dual idea of Buddha, that says we are all Buddhas and capable of manifesting the living Buddha in our lives. He also calls attention to how things like the Eastern idea of reincarnation ideas like that were thrown out of the Christian Bible, like reincarnation was in the year 553 at Constantinople. So originally, Christianity and Buddhism were even more similar. In general, Thich Nhat Hanh admonishes Buddhists to let the living Buddha, and for Christians to let the living Christ live and breathe and walk and talk in their lives in the form of love, compassion, understanding, and peace. That both spiritual paths say it is the smart and practical way to live. In this way, one would be living the truth of all true spiritual teachings. It's when our prayers cease to be words and become actions. In conclusion, Thich Nhat Hanh says what many scholars do, that he doesn't think there's much difference between Christians and Buddhists, and that the boundaries we've created between the two traditions are artificial, because truth has no boundaries. It's like one is an orange and one is a mango. They may have different flavors, but they're both fruits. They represent truth, the truth that will set us free and make the world free. Amen.